back to the Modern Firm Podcast. John Mitchell and Darren Root back at you.
Hey, John, looking forward to today's topic.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a long time. I think we have more clarity around what it means to target your ideal client than maybe we've ever had.
Yeah, I think ideal client profiles have become a thing in every industry now.
Yeah.
I read about it a lot across lots of spaces.
Doesn't it feel like, I'm sure this isn't true, but it felt like we came up with this idea 10 years, 15 years ago. Maybe it's just one of those things that's common sense and it comes out, but
it's probably been around a long time, and
it feels like everyone
probably read it somewhere 15 years ago and thought, oh, that would apply to the accounting
That's
profession.
probably what happened. Yeah.
And
but we've been talking about it for a really long time.
We've been talking about it for a long time, and it feels like a lot of people in the accounting space are now talking about it, which I think is great.
I think it's great too. And, as we talk about, if you've never heard the term ICP or ideal client profile before, the idea is that you begin to target who it is that we best serve.
Yeah, or at least you know who it is that you best serve.
That's right. Targeting is the next step.
Yeah.
That's right.
Just identifying,
yeah,
who it is that you like to serve. And it's probably not going to be one type of client for most people.
Yeah.
But just knowing who that is.
Yeah.
If you go back, John, to sort of the traditional accounting firm, it's kind of take whatever came in the door.
Uh-huh.
So your ideal client profile was if they had a pulse.
Yeah.
And if they didn't, you did their estate tax return or something. So that's kind of how the profession's been for a long time.
Yeah.
And we've done a fair amount of polling on this, John. Surveying might be a better word. And most firms say that less than 60% of their customers fall into what they would consider ideal clients.
Yeah. Most firm owners say that. We haven't done a lot with the staff yet at this point. And I think sometimes you may, if you're not down in it every day, you may not realize how much of your client list really doesn't belong inside of your firm.
I think it starts with trying to understand, what a profile even looks like.
Yeah.
Right. So when somebody says, "Oh, what's your ideal client profile?" most firms can't answer that, because it may be, you may have an ideal client profile for doing a tax return. Well, you probably don't. So you should have an ideal client profile for doing a tax return.
Yes.
As an example. So I was talking to one of our accounting firm friends recently, and we were talking. I think he was saying he had turned away 100 tax returns, last busy season, and I'm like, so what's going on? And he's like, we have no capacity. And I said, what's consuming all your capacity? And he's like, well, we do so many farm returns and so many Schedule Cs, and a lot of them. A lot of the farm returns, farm owners keep their receipts in the front end of their truck, and then they bring those in, and they're complicated, and they don't have good records. And I'm like, is that your ideal client profile? And he's like, no, that's just what we have. And I said, so of the 100 that you turned down, I mean, what if they were people like 2 W-2s with, some 1099s, maybe some Schedule D transactions and a Schedule A, and they were willing to pay you $1,000 per return. You're turning them down so that you can continue to struggle with the capacity that you have.
The guy with receipts in his dashboard.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's what we're talking about, though, right? You don't understand who your ideal customer is. You're just still serving whatever it is that you have.
Yeah. And I know who you're talking about. And I know that his firm's been around for a long time. And I think we drift into this client list that comes from a time where you did just take anybody who came in the door because you needed to. But we're in a place in terms of supply and demand right now where the demand is incredibly high and the supply is low. And you have a choice. You don't have to take anyone who can fog a mirror into your firm. And I think that's why I feel like this is such an important conversation to have with firms, because it's affecting your quality of life. If you don't have an ICP and you haven't identified these ideal client profiles for all of your products, for all of the things you're going to sell inside of your firm. Who should we be selling to? If you don't have that, you will drift into anybody who will write you a check, and it just leads to chaos.
Yeah, I think, John, it's more than we don't have to accept people that don't fit our ICP, because most firms will say we have a capacity issue.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So it's not about accepting new at the moment. It's about taking a look internally and saying, who are we currently serving that are not good fits?
And then what do we do about that?
Right, because if you keep doing what you've always done, chances are you're going to keep getting what you always got.
Yeah.
Right? So if you keep serving all of those, not being critical of farmers with receipts in the front of their trucks.
For some people, that might be an ICP.
But if you keep serving that demographic, the ones that you have, you're never going to make time for the 100.
Yeah.
So I think it starts, though. I think the process here starts by identifying, who your ideal clients are. And those are not, there's not just one, I don't think, for most firms. So, in our previous podcast, we had talked about client accounting and advisory services.
Yeah.
So you probably have an ideal client profile for your client accounting kind of clients.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably multiple ones. So maybe you have an ideal client profile that says they're an optometry practice. Maybe there's an ideal client profile for service-based businesses. You can go as broad or as narrow as you want. You can have as many as you want, right? But the point is you need to define who they are. You've already defined what you want to sell, right? You want to sell client accounting and advisory services. Now you need to define, what those clients look like.
Yeah.
So let's say that you define you have an optometry practice. There's a set of characteristics that make up the ideal optometry practice maybe for you. Maybe one of those characteristics is they pay you on time. Maybe one of them is that they need full service.
Yeah.
Whatever those characteristics are, and we can talk a little bit about how to find those characteristics for your ideal clients. But this is some work. You have to go through and analyze your practice.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we recommended, John, in a previous podcast is you have these core services around like client accounting and advisory services. Maybe you have payroll automation and advisory services. So maybe you have ideal payroll kind of clients. And then you have tax automation and advisory services. Maybe you have ideal tax clients as well. So you may have lots of different ideal client profiles based on the different core sections of your business. Does that make sense?
It does, Darren. And I think one of the things that makes now a really good time for you to be able to start to define this is that you don't have to start with a blank page anymore. There's a time where you just had to get a moleskin journal and open to page 1 and start writing. But there are more opportunities with generative AI than there have ever been to help you start thinking about your ICP. And we've got one right at Rightworks that is doing an amazing job for firms all over the country right now.
You're talking about Spark.
Talking about Spark.
So if you're not familiar with a tool that Rightworks has created, you can go to ai.rightworks.com and you can leverage it for free. It's called Spark, and it's a generative AI tool geared towards the tax and accounting space. So what we're talking about is, instead of saying in John's moleskin journal, instead of saying, what are my ideal client profile properties for an optometry practice, you can ask Spark, tell me what ideal client profile properties I should have for optometry practices. And something's going to come back from that, right? It's going to generate a response. You may agree or disagree with some of the components of it.
It's not a blank page.
But it's not a blank page. And it's a great place to start. And it's going to propose ideas that you haven't thought about.
Yeah.
And again, you may disagree with some of them, but at least you start building your list.
Yeah.
So as you go through the different components of your practice, whether it's client accounting, payroll, tax, you start thinking about who you want to serve across those different sectors. You can start asking Spark to help you generate the ideal client profiles around each of those identities.
Makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I would say too, as you get that page going and you get a draft of it ready, you begin to bring it up to your team and get their input as to, is this what makes sense for us to serve? Is this a great ideal client profile for us? And you'll get some engagement from your team that might say, yeah, and by the way, that guy doesn't fit and this one doesn't. And you begin to highlight some of that.
I think that's the next step. So after you've done the work of identifying your ideal client profiles, make sure you're working with your team and everybody gets alignment around the ideal clients that you want to serve.
Yeah.
I think the next step is to print off a client list.
Yeah.
And
start circling.
Go through that client list and say, this is essentially rating clients. It's not going to probably be, they fit 100% and they don't fit 100%. There are going to be some of those. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of gray area, and a lot of firms do with their client rating systems around their clients is, if there's 10 things that identify your ideal client profile, and you print off your client list and you say this is client A, you may say how many of these things does client A check off, and maybe they check off 8 out of 10 of them. Well, that doesn't make them a bad client that you're going to get rid of. It makes them probably still an A client. Yeah. You can define of the scale of 1 to 10, what's an A client? Maybe it's 8 out of 10's an A client, maybe 6 out of 10's a B client, maybe you make up your own scale, but then you can go through every single client and figure out whether they're an A, B, C, D, whatever client. And this gives you a framework then to start curating and culling the clients that are not good fits.
At least on paper, because then your next step is one of the hardest, and that is, what do you do with the F's?
That was I think we talked about in our last podcast. We were doing this session in New York, and that was one of the questions that came up is, what do you do? What do you do? If you have clients that are not good fits. Well, I would back up a second and say that what you can do is stop taking on bad clients.
That's true.
Right.
That's
so
step one.
When somebody calls, you don't have to take on anybody new. You can just say, "Nah, we're at capacity and we're not a good fit for us."
Yeah.
It's that person that you've been doing their tax return for 10 years that's not a good fit.
Yeah.
And the question is, what do you do? And I think my response to the guy was like, I don't know. Right. Raise their fees, call them and tell them they're not a good fit. Everybody's going to have a different opinion about this.
I thought about it in the room because there were lots of opinions going on in the room. And I thought there's this like passive aggressive kind of a solution to this, which is just, what if I doubled your fee? Maybe you just go away. And what we're finding out is that doesn't work all the time. They're just paying you more and they're still there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we hear stories about firms that just continue to raise fees and those bad clients keep.
If you get high enough, maybe they become ideal clients. I don't know. It depends on what it means to be an ideal client.
I think the client that bad client may keep complaining about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, at what point do you just say, I would rather have a bunch of good clients than the bad clients.
In all honesty, I mean, one of the solutions that I thought was most practical and maybe most helpful that came from the room was not just that we just raise rates and hope people don't take them, but it's that we just are honest, especially with people that we have been working with for a long time, and we prepare for the conversation by finding another opportunity for them. Hey, we're at capacity and we are trying to do better for the clients that we serve best. You're no longer fit in that category for us, but we do have a solution for you. Maybe there is another place that we can.
You have a referral firm.
You've got a referral firm and options, so that you're not just saying good luck.
Yeah.
Darren, I mean, the thing that makes this complicated is that when we're talking about it on a podcast, these are faceless, nameless human beings. But for most firm owners, these are relationships. These are people you play golf with, people you sit behind at church, people that that you've got to have some sense of clarity about that conversation as you go in.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, I practiced for 35 years. It's
served a lot of people you went to church with. And played golf with.
It's a hard thing, but if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you got.
Yeah.
So there needs to be an evolution that takes place. I'm usually a last resort guy is to let the client go.
Mm-hmm.
I usually ask the question, is there things that we can do on this list of 10, things that we identified as ideal client profiles to bring them up on that list? Are we not communicating well with them? Can we help them better understand their accounting system? Whatever those things are, can we charge them more? Are there things we can do that can move them up that list, without, impacting the relationship in a negative way?
Yeah.
So but again, this all just takes effort.
It does.
Right? You have to understand that managing your client list is one of the most important things you can do as a firm owner or as a firm leader. It is one of the biggest assets you have in your firm, along with your team.
Yeah.
And you have to spend time at it. This just doesn't happen by chance.
Darren, we talk a lot about the idea of you can either choose to be a technician or you can be an entrepreneur. Maybe there's a little bit of both in you. But when we did the last event with a room full of accountants, we kind of posed that question, and there wasn't a real epiphany until we got to this moment. And we had a conversation about printing your list and about circling and about grading and about making that next decision. And you begin to say, oh, I am an entrepreneur. I am creating something, and I am curating what comes into my firm. And I think you're probably not going to hear this podcast and go right out and completely transform your firm. That's just not how it works. But to be able to just take the next step, to be able to get rid of the very worst, the F clients, or to begin to identify your ICP and be able to at least notice what's going on in your firm is really a good step.
Yeah, I think if you take nothing else from this podcast, John, it's just, knowing who your ideal clients should be.
Yeah.
I think that's a great starting point, and having a framework for doing that. I think hopefully in this podcast, and maybe you have to go back and listen to it again, but you see a framework in there for identifying who it is that you want to serve, and how to start building, those ideal client profiles, and then the process of going through your client list. I mean, hopefully that helps you to do that, and then rating your clients. We mentioned before we've been doing more surveying with firms, and we find that less than 20% of firms spend any time rating clients.
Yeah. I think, Darren, we mentioned Spark early on in this, and I think part of what keeps firms from moving forward is they feel stuck. And I think the thing I like about Spark, the thing I like about generative AI in general, is that it may get you unstuck. Yeah. Go in, maybe that's one of the things you take from this podcast. Go in, get you a free account at Spark, and just start asking Spark questions about your ICP and begin the conversation with generative AI and maybe get unstuck.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, thanks for listening today. We hope you heard something that moves you more towards being a modern firm and building a firm that supports your life. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time on the Modern Firm Podcast.